Zoom. Okay, great. Everyone can hear me okay, right? Nothing just automatically didn't stop. Wonderful. Thank you for all the thumbs up. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening to celebrate our third and final event in recognition of Careers in Aging Week. For those of you who haven't been with us so far this week, Careers in Aging Week is a campaign created by the Gerontological Society of America, and it's a campaign focused on bringing awareness and excitement and interest around careers in aging. And my name is Dr. Lauren Snedeker, and I'm a faculty member here at the Rutgers School of Social Work, and I also coordinate the MSW Certificate in Aging and Health at the school. And this evening, we'll be hearing from researchers across Rutgers in different fields and different disciplines about their very critically important work. And I will go ahead and introduce these wonderful folks who have given us some of their time this evening. And if you don't mind just giving a little bit of a wave as I introduce you, that would be wonderful. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tracy Davis, who will be our first speaker this evening. Dr. Davis is an associate professor at the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies at the School of Health Professions. Dr. Davis has 2 undergraduate degrees and a master's from the University of South Florida and a doctoral degree from the University of Kentucky. She holds a certificate in applied statistics from the University of Kentucky and joined Rutgers in the fall of 2013. She's a full-time faculty member in the Interdisciplinary Studies Department in the School of Health Professions, where she is the Gerontology Track Coordinator for the Aging Track in the undergrad and grad degree programs. In addition to teaching, she is involved in numerous research projects, and the majority of her research, which she'll be speaking about this evening, is focused on HIV prevention among older adults and incorporating aging education into the high school curriculum. So welcome, Dr. Davis. And following Dr. Davis, we'll have Dr. Federico Sesti. If you don't mind giving us a wave, Dr. Sesti, thank you. Dr. Sesti is a professor of neuroscience and cell biology at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, Rutgers University. He received his laureate and PhD degree in physics from the University of Genova, Italy, and was a postdoc fellow in the lab of Benjamin Kaup. In Germany, I will say. The title is, excuse me, I am not going to take the risk of mispronouncing the name of that lab, but it was in Germany and it was Benjamin Kaup. And in the lab of Stephen Goldstein at Yale University. He joined Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in 2001, and the research of Dr. Sesti's lab revolves around the molecular basis of neuronal aging in both vertebrates and invertebrates, and in particular, how excess oxidants modify K+ channels and how this mechanism, which the lab has been the first to demonstrate, contributes to the progressive decline in neuronal function, which is part of the normal aging process and of neurodegenerative disease. Dr. Sesti is a Fulbright scholar and a member of several scientific societies. He serves in the editorial board of several journals and in an international, federal, and private funding agencies. Thank you, Dr. Sesti. Can clearly tell that I'm a social science, social worker person. I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of those words.
I wish I could have your accent. So don't worry about that. I wish I had your accent.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Sesti. So I'd like to also introduce Dr. Alyssa Koslov, instructor at Rutgers School of Public Health, Health Behavior, Society and Policy, and Population Aging. Dr. Koslov received her PhD in psychology from Washington University in St. Louis with a dual focus in clinical psychology and aging and developmental psych. Following graduate school, she completed an internship in geropsychology at the Palo Alto Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Palo Alto, California. One area focuses in terms of her research on psychological outcomes for older adults and adults with serious illness. And Dr. Koslov's other area of research focuses on how to increase overall access to, awareness of, and knowledge about palliative care. And as part of this research program, she developed the Palliative Care Knowledge Scale, which is a brief scale designed to assess layperson knowledge of palliative care and palliative a brief web-based intervention to improve knowledge of palliative care. She also documented knowledge deficits surrounding palliative care and analyzed web-based palliative care information pages to better understand what information about palliative care is available to laypersons. So thank you so much, Dr. Kosloff. And certainly, last but not least, good colleague and friend, might I add, Dr. Althea Pestine-Stevens. Dr. Pestine-Stevens, thank you, is a research project coordinator at Rutgers School of Social Work, where they manage the Age-Friendly North Jersey Alliance and support research projects related to community aging. Althea received a PhD in social welfare from the University at Albany, State University of New York, in 2019, with a mixed methods dissertation on mapping interorganizational relationships in an age-friendly county initiative. Althea also received a master's degree in public affairs from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, with a portfolio in nonprofit studies. Althea has presented research and evaluation findings and methodologies to professional, community, government, and academic audiences, and has taught a course on aging services in the Master's of Social Work program here at Rutgers. So welcome, Dr. Pestine-Stevens. Thank you all so much. I'd like to go ahead and invite Dr. Davis to share their screen to get us started. And we can see it.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about my research on HIV prevention. Of course, the goal is getting to zero, meaning no new diagnoses, and to completely eradicate HIV, which I believe we can and will do in the near future. I just wanted to share a little clip from Grace's story just to kind of situate the discussion this evening. So I'll read this quickly. Grace was dating again. She and George, a family friend she had known for years, became quite close, and their relationship became sexual. Because she wasn't worried about getting pregnant, Grace didn't think about using condoms. And because she had known George for so long, she didn't think to ask him about his sexual history. So Grace was shocked when she tested positive for HIV. So unfortunately, this story is not uncommon for older women who are diagnosed with HIV. So just keep this in the back of your mind as I go through some of my slides this evening. So according to the CDC, in 2018, over half of the people in the US diagnosed with HIV were over the age of 50. And that's for two main reasons. So people diagnosed before the age of 50 who have been successfully managed with antiretroviral medications, aging with the disease, and then also people being diagnosed newly past the age of 50. And we are diagnosing thousands of people over 50 each year. So the risk factors for contracting HIV are the same for younger and older people. So vaginal fluids, semen, those kinds of things, same risk factors. But there are some prevention challenges that make diagnosing and preventing HIV in older adults a little bit more difficult. So the first one is that older people in the US are just more likely than younger people to be diagnosed later in the course of the disease. And that's due to delayed testing. Sometimes there's confusion of symptoms for normal aging. And also older adults tend to have a poor prognosis as a result of that delayed testing and also delayed start in treatment. Also older adults tend to have a less efficient immune system. Also, many widowed and divorced people are dating again, kind of like Grace, and they're also less aware of the risk for HIV as compared to younger people. Perhaps they didn't have the education in school as some of the younger people did. Women also are less worried about becoming pregnant, therefore less likely to use condoms or practice safe sex, again, similar to Grace. We're also seeing increase in availability of erectile dysfunction medications, which has certainly facilitated sex for older men who otherwise probably wouldn't be capable of engaging in intercourse. And not to say there's anything wrong with erectile dysfunction medications, but if doctors are prescribing them without providing education or offering screening when necessary, that's where we can have a problem. Also, we know that older adults go to their doctors more often than younger people. However, they're less likely to discuss their sexual habits or drug use habits with their doctors, and their doctors are less likely to ask their patients about such issues. So I've given a little bit of background. We've seen an increase in older adults with HIV. We know there are some specific prevention challenges. And so now I just wanted to kind of, and I was really impressed with myself for keeping this so brief, go through the studies that I've done and tell you what I've done in the past and where we are now. So I began my interest in HIV with older adults when I was in grad school. I think it was probably about 2010. I started looking at medication adherence among older adults living with HIV, but then shifted and started focusing on HIV prevention. And so the first study I did was a literature review. My advisor had some experience with HIV and aging and helped me with this review. So the objective really was just to review what's out there, to kind of see where we are and where I could add to the literature and what's going on. So from the review, I found only 3 studies that focused on universal prevention, so prevention efforts for those who are HIV negative. Most of the studies were educational interventions done at some kind of community center or senior center. I found 5 studies that focused on HIV or HIV positive individuals, focusing on medication and behavioral adherence to stop the spread of HIV. And then I found 10 studies that focus on really just providing strategies and recommendations for future prevention efforts. And so my main takeaway from this study was that there is a significant need to increase our efforts for prevention, specifically for older adults. So my next study was my dissertation work, and I focused on primary care providers. And my objective here was to just explore primary care providers' current practices, perceptions, and awareness about HIV prevention, to find barriers and facilitators to prevention in primary care settings. So I sat down and had 24 interviews with primary care providers, being physicians, physician assistants, or nurse practitioners, and they all had to see patients over the age of 50. So with the study, we did find a number of facilitators and barriers to HIV prevention in primary care. For example, we found lack of time. A lot of older adults come in and they have a number of issues they need to discuss. And so the providers simply run out of time to address screening and testing. Work experience could either be a facilitator or a barrier. If people had a lot of experience working with those who are HIV positive, they're probably more likely to bring up screening and education. But for those maybe who worked in areas where they hadn't seen a lot of cases, they were less likely to broach the topic. And then most providers did express some sort of discomfort in having discussions about sexual habits or drug use with older patients who maybe reminded them of their parents or grandparents. So my main takeaway from this study was that most of the providers, unfortunately, are not engaging in HIV prevention practices for older adults. And again, we need to increase our prevention efforts. So moving on from there, I did this study with older adults here at Rutgers, or while at Rutgers. And the goal of this study was just to explore older adult HIV/AIDS knowledge, but also to assess their perceived HIV susceptibility and severity, and also to ask them about barriers and facilitators to HIV prevention in primary care. So for this study, I collected data through both survey and semi-structured interviews. So I used mixed methods. We had a total of 145 adults over 50. They either participated in both the survey and the interview, or one or the other. And from this, we found that older adults are willing to engage in discussions about HIV with their primary care providers, but they're waiting for their provider to bring up the topic. We also found we used the HIV KQ18 survey to assess HIV knowledge. And we found that older adults do need additional education about HIV and AIDS, and they also particularly needed education on the methods of transmission. So from this, I mainly took away that older adults are open to these discussions, they are in need of education, but they're waiting on their healthcare providers. Okay. And then my most recent study, I partnered with a colleague in nursing who was interested in HIV testing in general, but we wanted to do an updated study on barriers and facilitators so that we had a comprehensive idea of what was going on and where we could possibly intervene. So we did a systematic review, again, to identify barriers and facilitators of routine HIV testing. We categorized our findings using the socio-ecological model. I also used that in my dissertation work. And then we provided recommendations for interventions to increase screening. So we included articles published between 2006 and 2018. In order to be included, they had to be published in English or Spanish directly. They had to assess providers' barriers and facilitators directly. And what we found here, again, similar to what I found with my dissertation work, was most of the barriers were interpersonal. So again, lack of time, forgetting to screen, feeling like they needed more training, and discomfort in having those discussions. Most of the facilitators were directed at the institutional level. So providing if the facility had access to rapid testing or oral testing, and also if they could ensure confidentiality, providers were more likely to screen. So from this, our takeaway was that increasing maybe reimbursement and adding screening as a quality measure, it might incentivize testing. But again, we need to do things to increase screening. So as far as where we are now, we've done a lot of background work and we feel we're ready to develop and test some interventions in primary care settings. Unfortunately, with COVID, we were kind of stopped in our paths in terms of going into primary care settings, but hopefully in the very near future, we can work towards developing and testing some interventions. And some of the things we want to test out are electronic medical records, using them to prompt screening. So giving a reminder if a patient comes in for maybe a yearly exam, or if they're asking for prescription for erectile dysfunction medications, providing education and talking about screening. Also, when prescribing injectable medications, talking about not sharing needles. So I learned in Kentucky that even older adults who are maybe using insulin or what have you, if they run into a situation where they can't afford to buy it, they might share with a friend or neighbor, and that can be problematic as well. But also older adults are capable of, doing illicit injectable medications. And so that's discussion also that might need to take place. But other suggestions were having brochures and waiting areas, maybe to prompt discussions, and maybe using some of the marketing materials that NIA has developed for prevention efforts. So I will leave you with this. This marketing campaign came out a while ago. When it comes to sex, age is not a condom. If you take nothing else away from this, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Older adults are just as susceptible as younger adults, if not more so. So thank you.
Dr. Davis, thank you so much. I can speak for all of us where we so appreciate how you really took us through your entire experience with your doctorate and where you started. And for the students on the call, hopefully you're feeling inspired. It starts with that like burning question, and then it grows and grows. What are the people saying? What are the providers saying? What's everybody saying? And I'm just really excited to hear about these interventions in the primary care. Primary care offices are like, they're ideal for a lot of things to occur. So I'm excited for more to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm really surprised that I kept it so brief. Like each one of those studies, I think could
so
have been
impressed. Oh, but it was so fascinating just telling us what your takeaways were. You could really see the progression of your work just so beautifully. Really appreciate that. And I'm sure people have questions. Oh, Dr. Sesti, did you want to ask a question now? Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting. First of all, it's surprised that older people, which I am in that category, so that they get more susceptible to HIV. Then that's I didn't know that. So have you thought of making like sort of depliants to put in the primary care offices, so that people can just read and have you considered that strategy?
Yes, definitely. There's actually materials already out there, maybe not in primary care, but they've already been created by NIH that we've thought about utilizing to kind of, they can read, and then maybe that would prompt some questions and discussion between providers and patients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Actually, and thank you so much. Dr. Sessi, if you want to start gearing up your screen, we'd love to hear from you about your work. And definitely, I'm sure we'll have more questions for Dr. Davis as we go along. And thank you so much. Okay, we can see your screen, just so you know. Everything looks great.
To unmute myself. Okay, sorry. All right, so thank you very much for this opportunity. Do you hear me well? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So this cartoon shows you the three mechanisms through which biological cells produce energy. Okay, and the most important, the most common is oxidative phosphorylation. And essentially in oxidative phosphorylation, the mitochondria, the electron transport chain of the mitochondria oxidize certain substrates and takes the electrons from these molecules and use these electrons to generate a gradient of protons that then activates other enzymes that assemble the ATP molecule into ATP. And this process is associated with the production of carbon dioxide and water as a byproduct. And this works very well, but sometimes instead of producing water, the electron transport chain produces anion superoxide. And anion superoxide, which is indicated by this here, it's a very toxic molecule because it's an oxidant, or people know this as free radicals. So I call them free radicals. And it's very toxic because any component of the cell it comes in contact with, the lipid membrane, the DNA, the proteins that compose the cell, damage them because oxidize them and damage them. And so, this is just an example to show you that, even fundamental processes for life, such as the production of energy, because, life, the way we mean it, cannot exist without ATP, without the energy that we need to fuel our cells, is associated with some, toxic byproduct. And because, free radicals are so toxic, cells have developed a lot of so-called antioxidant defenses. And these antioxidant defenses are very efficient. As soon as a molecule, a free radical, is released in the cell, they immediately attack it and detoxify it. But what happens when, the organism starts to age? Well, in that case, there is, an increase for several reasons in the amount of oxidants that are present that start to build up in the cell. And at the same time, the antioxidant defenses gets weaker and weaker. And so they start to have an imbalance between the oxidant and the antioxidants. And this condition is known as oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is essentially not an acute form of injury, but rather it's a form of cumulative damage that cell have with aging. And eventually, if depending on, many factors, it can really become serious and even lead to the death of the cell. And because, like I said, the production of the oxidants is so, intrinsic, let's say, to life, to biological life, you can imagine that oxidative stress is pervasive. And in fact, if you look at this cartoon here, again, internet is a great thing because you can take all these, cartoons without any effort. You can see that all these different tissues are, subject to the damaging effects of oxidative stress, and all these, pathologies as well. So any pathology, important or less important, as always has oxidative stress as a comorbidity. In my lab, we interested in the function and the physiology of the brain. And as you probably know, the brain is composed of neurons and support cells or glia. The neurons form these networks in which the unique characteristics of this network is that they modulate electrical activity. And you can easily see this electrical activity, for example, in an electroencephalogram. You know? So the electroencephalogram that is recorded in a patient is actually the results of billions of the activity of billions of single neurons in the brain. All right, start my nose. So my lab is interested in the proteins that actually are responsible for this electrical activity, the ion channels. And the ion channels are a fundamental class of proteins. Life cannot exist without them. They are present everywhere in any type of organism, in any tissue, in plants, animals, everywhere. And in neurons, what they do, they work as gates. So they open and close, and by opening and closing, they allow the movement of ions across the membrane of the neuron. And this movement of ions is associated with electrical signals. So, you know, if can use a very simple example, if you imagine someone that is playing an instrument, I don't know, a flute, the way he moves the hands and closes and opens the holes in the flute, it generates music. And the same thing is in a neuron. The way these ion channels open and close, they actually generate these electrical signals. And we have been working for many years on this potassium channel, this KCNB1 channel, that turns out to be susceptible to the effects of ROS. And what actually happens is then there is a cysteine in the channel at position 73 in the N-terminus of the channel. And this cysteine, when is attacked by free radicals, forms disulfide bridges with other cysteines of other channels. So they start to form sort of chain of proteins, the protein aggregates or oligomers. And it turns out these oligomers are very toxic. I'll show you in a minute. So if you think about oxidative stress as a pervasive condition and the fact that this channel is abundantly expressed in the brain, especially in the cortex, in the prefrontal cortex, in the hippocampus, which is very important for memory consolidation, in the hypothalamus that, for example, controls appetite and other things. You can imagine the oxidation of this channel could be relevant to not only aging, but certain disease, such, for example, Alzheimer's disease, where oxidative stress is really an important component. And for example, I'm showing you here some data from post-mortem human brains of Alzheimer patients and age-matched controls. And as you can see here in this Western blot here, because this oxidized channel forms this chains of protein, they will run higher on a Western blot. So these are essentially the oxidized channels, as opposed to here that are not oxidized. And there is much more oxidized protein in the Alzheimer, in this representative Alzheimer brain, compared to an age-matched control. This was a 82 female old woman. And, you know, quantification of this data shows that there is roughly a 50% increase in the number of these oxidized channels in the brains of in the Alzheimer brain. And this increase, which is a control if you want, really correlates well with the overall increase in oxidative stress that is present in these tissues, which again can be measured in many ways. And in this case, it was done using membrane carbonylation as a method. And so there is an increase of these oxidized channels in the brain of Alzheimer's disease patients. As I wrote here, you know, they can form toxic aggregates that can even kill neurons, but I haven't shown you how they do. And of course, when we want to study the mechanisms, we cannot use humans. So one animal model that is usually used for these studies is the mouse model, because it's genetically tractable. And so we can make, you know, transgenic or knock in mice that express mutants of a certain protein. And so talking about oxidative stress, why it doesn't go here? Okay. So we made this mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease background, this is the 3xTG mouse model. And we expressed a mutant, a mutant channel that instead of having the cysteine was mutated to alanine. So the channel cannot become oxidized and so cannot form these aggregates. And as you can see here, again, this is a membrane protein carbonylation in the brains of this mouse is less compared to the control, which is the 3xTG mouse. And then we can also do a positive control in which we actually increase the number of these channels, the wild type channels. So we can increase, just because we proportionally increase the number of channels, we increase the number of those channels that get oxidized. And in fact, we see an increase in oxidative stress. So, you know, one of the mechanisms by which these channels are toxic is essentially because they induce oxidative stress. And so it's a sort of, you know, autocatalytic process, I would say, in which an initial oxidative process would lead to the oxidation of these channels. And when these channels get oxidized, they induce more oxidative stress. So the process sort of feeds itself. And why I'm looking here at oxidative stress? Because oxidative stress is very important in Alzheimer's disease. And is one of the mechanisms through which there is production of amyloid beta, which is the most pathogenic, thought to be the most pathogenic factor in the disease. And in fact, in the brains of these mice, we see that the animals that express the mutant that does not get oxidized, they have much less amyloid beta compared to control. And the animals that overexpress the protein, so there is more oxidation of the protein, there is also more amyloid beta. And these are essentially, we're looking here at intraneuronal amyloid beta. We're not looking at the plaque because intraneuronal is more toxic than the plaque. And these are different techniques to essentially look at the same thing. So these are staining of, you know, brain section, looking at the green is the staining of the beta amyloid inside the neurons. This is a Western blot looking at the protein, and also ELISA here, I think it was done by the ELISA. So essentially, there is a correlation with the oxidation status of this channel and the production of amyloid beta in this mouse model. But again, I really didn't explain to you why these channels are toxic. And to understand that, you have to understand that these channels are not alone in the membrane. They actually form complexes with other membrane proteins. And in particular, they form complexes with integrins. And integrins are important molecules because they sense what happens outside the cell and essentially translate events that occur outside the cell into, you know, intracellular biochemical signals. And integrins in particular are very important for cell survival. And so what we think is that when the channel gets oxidized, the integrins interpret this formation of these oligomers as something toxic. And so they initiate a program that leads to the self-destruction of the cell. It's a process called apoptosis. And this also offers us therapeutic possibilities because we know very well how this integrin signaling work. And in particular, there is this class of proteins here that is the tyrosine kinases proteins that are activated during this apoptotic signaling of integrin, but SERK kinases are also implicated in cancer. And it turns out that there are several medications, several FDA-approved drugs that are used to target SERK kinases. So the idea is that we could, target the SERK kinases that are activated in the Alzheimer brain and somehow, ameliorate the disease. And so the first thing is to show that this strategy, of course, work. And again, making a long story short, I'm just showing you, first of all, what kind of drugs we can use. And in particular, we focused on dasatinib. Dasatinib is a SERC inhibitor that is used to treat two forms of leukemia, Philadelphia chromosome positive leukemia and chronic myeloid leukemia. And also it's used to treat a certain neuroblastoma. And one advantage of this drug is that it's blood-brain barrier permeable. So it goes in the brain, which is the first thing if you want to treat Alzheimer's. So it's naturally permeable. It's very well tolerated because it's been around for more than 20 years. So there is a lot of clinical data available about these drugs, and it's very well tolerated. It can be given for years actually and has no side effect, which is very good when you're thinking about treatment for Alzheimer's disease, because clearly cannot give a drug for a week. So these patients have to be, under medication for months, if not years. So this is a good thing for this drug, and also is going out of patent, and so should not cost much in the future. At the moment, it's very, very expensive though, and it costs between $200,000 a treatment for 1 year for a patient. And so, making a long story short, I'm going to show you some results with the drug in mice. And again, here I'm showing you effect of this drug on cognitive function of mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. And in this studies, usually what we do in research is to look at the Morris-Water-Maze test. And the Morris-Water-Maze test offers several advantages. So it's very well established, and essentially allows us to kill two birds with a stone, because it has two readouts. One is the ability of the animal to learn a certain task. In this case would be to locate quickly a platform that is just under the water, in a pool of water, because mice don't like water, so they want immediately go on dry, and so the platform is just below the skin of the water, so it's not visible to the animal, and the animal has to learn how to locate it. It's always the same place, of course. So that's the first readout, and then there is the second readout, that is how the mouse is able to actually retain the learning. And so it's a long test. It takes 7 days, but it's very useful. And as you can see from this data, 1 month treatment with dasatinib has no effect on the learning part of the test, and also on the second here, the retention, memory retention. So essentially didn't do anything. But if we keep giving the drug, and so we go to a 2 months treatment, we actually start seeing significant improvements in learning and also in memory retention here. So I didn't explain you in detail how the tests work, but believe me, it's a significant improvement here. So, and then there are, of course, many other evident experiments showing that the drug works in Alzheimer's disease, but I don't want to bore you, and there is no time for that. So, concluding my talk, all these studies we're using dasatinib in mice model leads us to the idea of making a clinical trial to test the effect of dasatinib in Alzheimer's disease. And this started before the pandemic. And so we assembled a multi-center group with 2 centers, one here, the Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, and the other in Italy, in an hospital in the north part of Italy, where they have a lot of Alzheimer's patients. We don't know really why, but they have a lot of patients. And then the pandemic stuck, so we could not do it. And now we're thinking of resuming this effort. But at the moment, there are problems with the hospital here, because there is a lot of changes in the dementia clinic at the hospital. Many physicians are leaving, other physicians are coming. So I mean, the 3 physicians shown here are actually still there, but so at the moment this clinical trial is on hold. But there are other hospitals, other groups that have been testing the same type of drug, the same class of drugs for Alzheimer's patients. It's not dasatinib, it's another drug, it's called nolitilib, but it targets the same proteins, targets the same tyrosine kinases. So it's just a third generation drug. And they had incredible results. So this effort is continuing. Probably my lab will not the first one, the front line because of this, but I can predict that maybe in 20 years from now, there could be some, circ tyrosine kinase inhibitors that could actually find home, for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And so I would just like to acknowledge my founding for the studies and also some of the people that has been working on these things over the years. And so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sessi. That is fascinating. It's so interesting. As I said, I went to Rutgers undergrad at Blaustein, and I was thinking back to my chemistry days, but it was so fascinating to hear about your research and also so hopeful, especially with respect to anyone who's been touched by Alzheimer's disease or any dementia-related illness. And working in that field for many years myself, I'm very excited to hope that sooner rather than later, I'll be able to share, as we discussed before this talk, more opportunities for FDA-approved medications because it's been a while. So thank you so much, Dr. Sessi. So appreciate this. Dr. Kozlov.
Hello.
Please. Thank you.
I'm gonna change it up a little bit. I've so appreciated everyone's talk so far, and I love hearing about the work happening at Rutgers and aging in different fields. I'm going to give a slightly different talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, but only a little bit, because I want to make sure that the students on the call who are thinking about careers in aging kind of have an understanding, at least about what my career in aging research has looked like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, how I got to where I am, what I do, and why I do it, without getting into the nitty-gritty data components. But if you want the nitty-gritty data components, reach out to me privately and I will give you the PowerPoint talk of a lifetime. So my name is Alyssa Kozlov. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. So I went to get my PhD in clinical psychology 2 years after I did my undergraduate degree in psychology. So my trajectory was undergraduate degree. I did 2 years in a research lab to get a little bit of research experience. And then I applied for a PhD in clinical psychology, which is it's an incredible, it's my favorite degree. It's the only degree I have. It's a very versatile degree because it allows you, much like social work and nursing, it allows you to do direct clinical work or research work. So I chose to pursue that degree because at the time I was choosing to pursue it, I didn't know if I wanted to be a psychologist treating patients, or if I wanted to be a researcher doing research on how to improve the lives of older adults, or some combination of the two. And the degree allowed me the versatility and it gave me the training to do both. It is a long haul. I just want to give anyone, I know Miles is out there and he and I have spoken. It's a long haul. It's 5 years of coursework, and then a year of a clinical internship training program. And then almost always you have to do a postdoc, which is 1 or 2 years, which is required to get licensed and to get the research experience you need to then maybe get a faculty position or a clinical position somewhere. So from the time you start to the time you leave, it's about 7 years. Some people do it in 6, some people do it in 8, but it's a long haul. That being said, it gives you incredible training. So the kind of graduate coursework I took was in content knowledge, such as mental health, geriatrics, cognition, neuropsychology, assessment, and treatment. I took therapy courses. I took 5 semesters of statistics courses. I took research methodology courses. It was a really rich and diverse training background. And all the while I was doing clinical work. I did clinical work in psycho-oncology. I did clinical work in palliative care. I did clinical work in a sleep center. I did clinical work in an outpatient mental health clinic. And then when I did my year-long clinical internship, I did it at the VA Palo Alto, where I did an inpatient PTSD unit. I did a psychiatric ER rotation. I did home-based primary care, and I did a palliative care and hospice rotation as well. So I have spent a long time touching different components of both clinical care and research to sort of get me to where I am now, which I think is a generalist when it comes to mental health, but a specialist when it comes to geriatric mental health, both in terms of treatment and research. So after I did all of my graduate school training, I went on to a postdoc in behavioral geriatrics at Weill Cornell Medicine, where for 2 years, all I had to do was research. It was like the greatest 2 years ever. All of a sudden, I wasn't teaching, I wasn't taking courses, I wasn't doing clinical work. I was just doing research and learning how to write grants. Because when you say that you want a research career in aging, what you're pretty much signing up for, unless you find the rare bird, hard money position, you're signing up for a career in grant writing. For the most part, in academia, at least. Now, that's not true in every industry, but I've been coached that for me to have a career in research, I better be a good grant writer, because someone has to pay for that research. And usually you're looking at places like the National Institute on Health, the National Institute on Aging. There's small pilot grants, there's foundation grants, but you got to be a really good salesman of the kind of work you want to do. And the way that you do that is by making sure that you do work that really matters. And I think that when it comes to aging, the good news is there's actually a lot of grant dollars out there for people who want to do research in aging. The National Institute on Health is constantly allocating more and more money specifically for dementia and Alzheimer's research. So if you have any interest in doing dementia or Alzheimer's research, there are dollars out there to be had. Yes, Lauren says, especially now with the pandemic, it's true. We know that the pandemic disproportionately impacted older adults, both from an illness perspective and from a mental health perspective, which is where my specialty lies. So the research in aging is needed. It's sorely needed. I didn't intend to get myself into a high needs field. I just always really loved working with older adults, and it was always something that I thought I could think about indefinitely. And so I was lucky because not that many people want to work in geriatric fields, in the field of aging, and there's a huge need for it. And so it's this sort of perfect alignment of, hey, if you're here and you're thinking about a career in aging, let me tell you, you're going to have some job security, whether that's a clinical career or a research career, sorely needed and seriously underrepresented in terms of the workforce development. So congratulations on being naturally interested in something that not that many people are naturally interested in. Let me talk a little bit about my own research background and sort of my winding road of all things geriatric mental health. So when I was in college, it probably goes back further. When I was in high school, I did a lot of, and for whatever reason, I was a young woman who got cast in 4 shows in a row as a geriatric role. I played the grandmother, I played the grandfather, I played another grandmother, I played another grandfather. I kept getting cast in geriatric roles, and it felt good. You know, I enjoyed trying to embody, authentically embody an older adult. And when I got to college, the first course I signed up for was a biology course called Aging and the Elderly. It was a biology service learning course, and we learned about the biological components of aging, cell senescence, things like that. I'm not a particularly hard sciencey person. And then we went and volunteered in nursing homes And I took to the material. I took to the volunteering component. I ended up TAing the course the next year and kind of overhauling what the volunteering component of the course looked like, and really kind of expanded on people's reactions to volunteering in nursing homes. We happened to be volunteering for a nursing home that was on the Connecticut watch list for being like a truly abysmal place. Older adults were being neglected there. I think they had several deaths due to dehydration. So it was a particularly grim environment to be volunteering in. And it felt really important to be there and to visit my senior companion and talk to them and make sure that their needs were being met. And it sort of just set me off on this path of like, at any given point throughout college, if there was an opportunity to choose an independent study, I chose one related to older adults. I couldn't stop thinking about, what are we doing? Just what are we doing here? What's the plan? How is there a nursing home where people are dying of dehydration around the corner from my ritzy small private liberal arts college? Like, this didn't feel okay. And so after college, I took a research assistantship at the Weill Cornell Institute for Geriatric Psychiatry, where, I should probably pause and say, during college, I did a senior thesis on the unique experience of aging while incarcerated. I knew that our prison system was aging. I had read about it in one of my courses. Like, it was like a throwaway statistic, like, and by the way, like, prisons are getting old. And it rocked me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, because the idea of someone who's incarcerated and someone who is frail and older felt completely incongruent, and I needed to make sense of it. So I did, for my senior thesis in college, I did a qualitative study of the experience of aging while incarcerated, and I was this like plucky little 21-year-old thinking that I could just go down to Angola, Louisiana, and interview lifers, people who had life sentences, to talk to them about how it was to age in prison. I wish I could go back in time and do that study more justice, but it further nurtured the idea that there's this inherent resilience to aging, because these folks that I was talking to had hope and resilience even in truly the bleakest of conditions. So I then took a job working for this amazing researcher out of Cornell, studying the stigma associated with seeking mental health care in homebound older adults with depressive symptoms. So I went into different older adults' homes and did clinical interviews with them. And it was eye-opening. There's really something, a lot of times clinicians don't get to see into the home life. And I was now a plucky 22-year-old going into older adults' homes from the South Bronx to Upper Westchester, and seeing firsthand how the built environment and how socioeconomic privilege and access to resources was completely impacting people's aging experience, but also that there was this unique or a not unique situation where people didn't want mental health services. Even though they were horribly depressed, there was tremendous stigma surrounding seeking help for their depression. Whether they had resources or not, there was stigma associated with seeking mental health treatment. This was back in 2009. From there, I went to grad school, and my advisor at the time was getting really interested in palliative care. For those unfamiliar, palliative care is multidisciplinary care for people with serious illness and their families that's aimed at symptom reduction. Not necessarily aimed at curing the serious illness, but rather aimed at managing the side effects of the serious illness and the treatment of the serious illness. And he asked me during my interviews, would you be okay talking to folks who are dying? And like, I felt like I was gut punched. I was like, how invasive, how intense, how uncomfortable, but turned out I was, because I accepted the role in his lab, and I then created a research agenda focused on how to increase access to palliative care, because like mental health stigma, mental health treatment stigma, there's a lot of misinformation and stigma surrounding end-of-life care. And palliative care is not, it does not mean that you can no longer pursue curative treatments. It does not mean that we're going to ration healthcare. But back when I was starting this, and I think still today, no one had really heard of palliative care, and those who had heard of it thought that it was something that it wasn't. During graduate school, I got to do a lot of clinical work too, and I rotated with a palliative care team at the St. Louis VA, and realized that when I walked in the room and said, "Hi, my name is Alyssa, I'm part of the palliative care team," people said, "Get out of here, I'm not ready for you." Which really led me to a research agenda focused on, what do people think palliative care is? Like, I'm just here to talk about depression and anxiety symptoms. You seemed really upset that I walked in the room. Like, what do you think I'm here for? And how can I help alleviate the concerns you have that I'm going to pull the plug on your life support? And so to that end, I ended up creating a palliative care knowledge scale. I've evaluated different educational resources about palliative care, and then ended up developing a new research agenda on psychological interventions within palliative care, because as palliative care expands, the goal of palliative care is, in theory, to manage mental health symptoms as well. But from what I have determined in doing some research in the area, we're not really giving a lot of attention to how we manage mental health symptoms. We just say that we will, but we're not using all of the advances that the psychological sciences have made in terms of mental health treatment. They're not being integrated into palliative care. So we're not seeing cognitive behavioral therapy routinely integrated into palliative care. We're seeing a lot of like psychosocial support, which is great. Everyone benefits from psychosocial support, but when people have clinical depression or clinical anxiety, psychosocial support may not cut the muster. We may need something a little bit more robust. And luckily, the psychological sciences in the last 50 years have come up with some really robust treatments for mental health disorders, but we have not adapted them and applied them to older adult populations or patients with serious illness, and with as much scientific rigor and thoughtfulness as I think we should be. So my research has used surveys, secondary data analyses. I'm doing intervention research now using randomized controlled trials. I'm doing clinical trials research. I've analyzed information pages you can find online. I've published in lots of different journals. My career keeps taking kind of new directions as I innovate in the space. And I think that's one of the things I like most about my career in research related to aging, is that once we figure out the problem or the question we want to answer, I get to answer it using all of the tools that I've been trained with, which involves statistics and survey design and interventions and secondary data. And like, it's just, you get to answer questions in really cool ways. And that's what I really like about research. So I'm going to stop there. And if anyone wants any follow-ups, I'm happy to share some data. I just want to make sure everyone had an overview of different ways to have clinical or research careers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Kozloff. That was fascinating. I love to hear about your experience in playing the roles. How amazing. What a great story to understand. We all have like our stories, how we got involved in this work. I love that. That makes me so happy.
Superhero origin story, right?
It's so good. It's so good. And it's fascinating, you know, as a social worker doing that psychosocial support and all these things, it is fascinating. I'm looking at Myrta right now, one of our new aging and health certificate students, hoping you're feeling inspired to try and explore different types of interventions that you learn in all the clinical social work classes. That's really the point, right? Like to try these types of CBT, you know, it doesn't have to be the 8 to 12 week session type of things. Like you could just try those techniques, right? Like showing the triangle. Yeah, I
Totally.
love it. It's wonderful.
Totally.
It's wonderful. So great. Thank you so much. Well, I want to make sure we give Dr. Pacine Stevens time to speak. Thank you so much, and take it away. Thank you, Dr. Kosloff, and all of our wonderful presenters.
Hi everybody, and thank you, Lauren, for organizing this too. I'm going to share my screen. I kind of interpreted this program a little bit more similarly to Dr. Kozlov than I think the first two presenters, but I do have some slides as well because I'm a visual person and so it helps me keep my flow too. So I titled my session "A Foot in Each World." I kind of took this opportunity to reflect on my career so far, which is still very much early career. But this was actually a really nice opportunity to kind of think about what's driven me to get to where I am so far and where I might be going. So I titled it "A Foot in Each World" because I realized that where I've gone every step of the way has really been dualities. It's really been influenced by dualities, you know, kind of the push and the pull of two different things that together kind of balance me out and make me feel satisfied and energized and challenged in the work that I do. So you could see that reflected currently in my title, because I kind of have two titles. My official Rutgers title is Research Project Coordinator. I consider this to be an alt academic position, which is that it's at a university, but not a tenure track faculty position. And it's grant funded, it's a staff position, and I get to work on lots of different research projects that are faculty on aging work on, and related areas too. There's been some disability inclusion related projects too. I also have the title of program manager for Age Friendly North Jersey, which is a little bit more of a community practice type of a role. I am in the social work school, so we do approach things from kind of a social work perspective too. And I'll go into a little bit of what that means as well. I'll talk about both. So this is many dualities on here, and Lauren, I'll make sure to get you an updated copy of the slides. All of these are linked to the actual publication. I thought with just kind of talking about the ways that the different types of publications I've been able to be part of help kind of shape that kind of career that makes me happy and makes me continue to feel challenged to continue to grow my skills and strengths, but also lets me use my skills and strengths that I have. I think that's really important in every job, more so than the title or anything else. So this first one on the bottom left bubble that you can't really read the title of, this one is a theoretical paper. It's that I was one of the authors brought on by my mentor, Emily Greenfield, at Rutgers School of Social Work. And this is leaders from Florida and Maine and New Jersey in scholarship of age-friendly community initiatives, which I'll also describe a little bit more, and thinking about how we can bring more theoretical knowledge and be a little bit more theory driven in an area that's very largely practiced on the ground. So I get to kind of be part of those strategic thinking, big picture type thinking types of projects. But then also you see the two bubbles in the middle are both technical reports. So the top one is our we work with 16 plus communities now in northern New Jersey, but this was a report that we did on the original cohort of 8 community initiatives that were 4 years into their project implementation. And we developed a survey that to kind of understand what their processes and structures are. And this was really developmental evaluation in the sense that we are helping them learn the learn more about their programs and processes and continue to improve them as they go along, while we're also providing evaluative feedback to the funders and to the communities as well. We also call it utilization focused because we hope that they take the information there and use it at all different phases. The piece in the middle is and I had more of a lead role on that first report up there on the top, but the one in the middle, the New Jersey Inclusive Healthy Communities, I get to be involved, also providing support and other project coordination for different research projects. I really love having my toes in lots of different waters. So this was a really wonderful project that the state, the New Jersey Department of Disability Services, funded 18 grantees to figure out different types of build capacity for and implement. They had 2 different grants, projects that could help their communities become more inclusive for people with various types of disabilities. So it was, it's really great to be able to be part of lots of different types of projects. The one on the top right, giving, receiving, and doing together, interorganizational interactions and age-friendly community initiatives, that's the original research publication type that I'm able to participate in. This is based on also kind of what my dissertation was, and I was able to kind of, my dissertation was more of a starting point rather than a polished finishing point, and to be able to continue to build some of that work, to continue to build on that here in New Jersey at Rutgers. And surprise, surprise, my dissertation was mixed methods, but we'll get into that on the next slide. The piece on the bottom right is the need for community practice to support aging in place during COVID-19, and that was an editorial for the Journal of Gerontological Social Work. So, just being able to participate in also that aspect, being a little bit more of an advocate, is something that's important to me. Also, something that I realized I forgot to add to this slide is a paper that was published last year that I co-wrote with one of our community leaders for a practitioner's journal for the Aging Life Care Managers, the Journal of Aging Life Care, about ways that aging life care managers and age-friendly communities could work together to improve the way that their communities are for older adults and people of all ages. So let me move on to the next one. So I wanted to talk, like Alyssa, I wanted to talk about my path that got me to where I currently am. Lots of moving. I'll give you a hint. There's lots of moving involved in it. So I started with a bachelor's degree at the University of Rochester in statistics and religion, dual major, of course, because I liked the way that the statistics made my brain feel, and I liked the way that the religion classes kind of made my heart feel, learning about different communities and different people. I was planning on being an actuary at the time, but then and so because when people would hear, I put a quote in there, when people would hear that I was double majoring in statistics and religion, they would say, what's the probability that God exists? So, but a lot of older people are people who are involved in their religious institutions. So little did I know older adults was waiting for me. I just didn't know it yet. So then I decided that the way I was going to combine statistics and religion was in program evaluation, because I could evaluate any type of program using statistics, analytical skills, and the focus on people. That I was focused, I cared more about the people, not the people as just a statistic. So I got my Master of Public Affairs with a certificate in nonprofit studies. My goal then was, I was thinking kind of youth, children in the foster care system. I worked as a program evaluator for a nonprofit at that point. They were implementing a trauma-informed care program in residential treatment centers for youth in the foster care system in Texas. There was a lot of kind of backward stuff going on there, if I can say that. But yeah, a lot of very basic trauma informed care going on there. And that was a very powerful experience for me. And so I decided that I didn't want to be an evaluator at that time because I wanted to keep asking why, which you can do as a practitioner and as an evaluator, but it felt I was pulled towards more graduate school at that point. So that's why I got my PhD in social welfare at SUNY Albany School of Social Work. And the way that I got actually, because I came there and I was working on child welfare, I was planning on working with I was working on a project on kinship care, kids that are in informal kinship care, which is a lot of grandparents raising grandkids. So that was kind of my first little taste of working with older adults. But then I was supposed to do a project for a qualitative methods class, and the IRB didn't go through in time because I wanted to be able to, publish based on it. The IRB didn't go through. One of my other professors said, "Well, you're Jewish. Albany has a really vibrant Jewish community, older Jewish community. Why don't you interview them? You'll get some practice doing interviews. It'll be a nice community building experience. And there won't be the pressure to kind of publish on it. You'll just learn those skills." And I did, and I fell in love and I couldn't go back. So I didn't really have any mentors there in gerontology. So that led me to Rutgers for my postdoc with Professor Emily Greenfield, who is just the most fantastic mentor, really. And the opportunity to continue with what my dissertation was on age-friendly community initiatives, and then to be able to continue doing that based on the work that she's been developing here. So I put in that this is my path so far. I got really lucky that after my postdoc, we kind of carved out this position for me based on the needs for the different grant projects, and also where the skills that I wanted to continue to learn and develop for my own career professional development too. So it was definitely, I hope, mutually beneficial. I can give a little bit of an overview on age-friendly community initiatives. I recognize that it's getting late and I don't want to blab on about things too much. But basically, the World Health Organization started this concept in 2002, where they found what are the key features of communities that make them more amenable for I don't like the word successful aging or healthy aging, because what do those really mean? But really for folks to be able to age in their community, grow older in their communities in the ways that are the most strengthening for them. And it includes elements of the built environment, the social environment, communications, and the integration of different types of health services and social services too. So here's a map of the communities that are in the AARP network of age-friendly communities or livable community initiatives, just for a sense of kind of the scope, the breadth of it a little bit. Not all communities that are working on anything age-friendly are necessarily in the network. So my role here is with Age-Friendly North Jersey, which is now we have 16 plus communities that include 2 counties that have groups that are organizing around making their communities more age-friendly. And this grew out of simultaneously a research program and a grant making program. So this is how those 2 pieces really come together here. So at the same time that the initial 9 communities got funded around 2016 to form these initiatives that comprise, the core team. So it's not like it's the retirement community or something. It's people in the community who come together as leaders to try to figure out ways that they can improve those various different domains of community life. And then we were also a grantee. It was before my time here, but Dr. Greenfield was a grantee also to do the evaluation and do research for that project. And we realized that we were not neutral observers in our research, that the funders, the 2 local foundations, were coming to us to ask for their advice on ways they could improve the grant making program. So we were giving research presentations, we were doing strategic development with them, we were helping bring in other speakers on topics such as housing or transportation. And that was really kind of a co-mutual development type of a project. So in October of last year, so it's been about 6 months now, that my position was formally started, where I transitioned from being a postdoc to being a research project coordinator and being the program manager for Age for Early North Jersey, where now I continue to have kind of the dual roles of helping develop the network and running monthly meetings where I'm bringing together panels of peer mentors, bringing in outside speakers, finding folks to present on research, and helping communities network with each other. I do a monthly newsletter. We have bulletin boards. We have website, blog, which our team all works on together. But then we also are doing research. Right now we're working on we're doing data collection on a survey where we're collecting information about the partners and the ways that they collaborate. What does it mean to be a collaboration, to be a really community-wide initiative where you have all these different players? And so we're doing a social network study right now on what that looks like. And it's all informed by our prior research, but also our work with them. They're really intertwined. I think I've already kind of touched on this points of why our team at Rutgers Social Work is really so invested in this, and why it's been such a great opportunity for me. And again, you're welcome to look at these slides. I did want to mention that one of our communities, they're really fantastic. They're looking for a coordinator. So since this is a Careers in Aging Week event, I did link, if you have this, this is the link. If you click on it when you have the slides. Unfortunately, it is a part-time position without benefits, but it's a good opportunity for folks transitioning back into the workforce or looking to formalize their volunteer efforts into something paid a little bit. Really great in Maplewood is where the position is, in the Maplewood Recreation Department, and they do amazing work there. With their local policy advocacy. They've got some great partners with universities, with their library, lots of great stuff. So I just wanted to provide, I know I'm a minute over already, a couple of quick reflections. So I have been very privileged to cultivate this unique opportunity that combines my passions for research and community building, and also to have such richness in my mentorship opportunities where I can both receive and provide mentorship, not just from academics, but from funders, funders maybe more one way, but community leaders and local government, county and municipal, and students. And of course, that goes both ways, as we all know, as educators and scholars, that you learn a lot from your students while you're learning with them. Also, if I could give any advice to students or to folks who are trying to figure out, because, I'm looking at mapping out my path, and sometimes things look like they might be a little bit disparate, but look for what those common threads are, and that helps you find how you can be true to yourself and have the most mutually beneficial professional relationship, with your employer too. So, what are the underlying skills that are involved, even if you're working in things that look kind of different? What are the underlying values that you have and that area has that you can bring to your next opportunity? And what energizes you? It could be the subject, it could be the methods, or it could be the setting. Like, I knew that I wasn't someone who really enjoyed being in hospitals, so a healthcare profession wasn't really going to be for me. But I like being in universities, so that was an option. Like, what space do you feel comfortable in is kind of important too. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to continue to connect with anybody who would like to, and to post the slides.
Thank you so much, Althea. Dr. Christine Stevens, thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be working with you on some of those projects, and hopefully more and more, and just happy to be connected through the school social work and through the wonderful Emily Greenfield, as you said. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and for all the presenters for sharing all of their inspirational research and ideas and thoughts and suggestions to anyone who's joining us now or who will be viewing the recording. And with that, I'd love to just open up the opportunity to ask any questions of any of the presenters, or if any presenters have questions for anyone in the room, our virtual room, of course. So questions, comments. Roxanne, really good question. Oh, sorry, Luann, go ahead. Roxanne, I'll be mailing or emailing the recording out, and it also will be on YouTube through the School of Social Work, but I suspect through the other schools here as well, such as public health and health professions and whoever has a channel. So you could probably just Google it on the YouTube. Oh, I really dated myself there, but you could find it on YouTube, and I'll be sending it out. Go ahead, Luann. Oh my gosh. Where's my coffee?
No, that's fine. So I really appreciated Dr. Soshi's discussion about the Alzheimer's research. My mom passed from Alzheimer's, and I keep up with research as much as I can because I did see her progression over 7 years really deteriorate. And, I did everything that the doctors asked me to do and so on. And I just, it was just honestly, it was a lovely, loving experience to be with her in that journey. So as a family member, as a daughter, whatever. So I appreciated that research because I'm always interested in seeing what we are doing to kind of address that issue. But with that aside, Lauren, I'm from the community perspective. I'm boots on the ground, looking at seniors, dealing with senior issues. And what I'm seeing is, and maybe there's research being done that some of the other speakers can speak to about community and family, because I'm getting a lot of calls from family members who are taking care of their parents who are in their 90s, and the family structure has broken down because nobody wants to help care for them. And they're, the caregivers are depressed. And I worked for an organization called Vital Decisions for 2.5 years, and whoever spoke about the palliative care really strikes home with me, because it is so important to have those conversations with loved ones about how the person who is aging, or the person who is needing to make decisions in their end of life stage, that their family members are making their wishes, making sure that they're honoring the wishes of their loved ones. And I'm really seeing a lot of family breakdowns of the elderly and their parents who are being left alone. And I'm just really nervous for our society of aging, who are living longer, that are really struggling with having people help them, in life. So I was just wondering too, I recently experienced aging with disabilities, with the developmental disabilities, and if there's any research in the field of developmental disabilities. So I kind of went all over the place. So I started with Alzheimer's, and I went with neglect with aging, and then I went to developmental disabilities. But these are the issues I'm dealing with in my community. And so I just was curious to see if any of the speakers have any knowledge of research or anything that's going on in those populations.
So I do some caregiver research, and you're right, it's a huge need. And I think the sort of depressing news is that NIA has been throwing money at caregiver dementia research for so long now, and very few studies have shown significant effects.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Some of the ones that get the best results I think are wonderful, but I don't know that they're clinically implementable. They're these like incredibly elaborate multimodal interventions to help caregivers that involves education, psychosocial support, training, all of these things. Like it's not great. It's not great. And I think that more and more resources need to be devoted to supporting caregivers. Otherwise, we're going to keep having more and more problems in terms of caregivers burning out and institutionalizing their loved ones, and those institutions not having the staffing for it. And then not to mention the caregiver's own distress, which I think we don't think about enough, right? Like there's no good mechanism right now for caregivers to get treated, because when they show up for their patients, loved ones, appointments, the caregiver's not the patient. So like there's no great integration of care for the caregiver in a lot of settings.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I know
And-
that they're funneling more and more resources towards figuring this out.
Yeah.
Caregiver research is really big right now. And caregiver policy work is like a front and center too. So I think the awareness of how big a problem this is getting there, but the solutions are not quite there yet.
And I noticed too, and maybe Dr. Davis can talk to this, and I don't know if you're a doctor or not, Ms. Davis, if with HIV research, I'm seeing a lot of seniors with alcohol issues, alcoholism, and I wouldn't necessarily say risky behavior, but definitely behaviors that are making certain senior communities nervous. And maybe I don't know if you've seen any of that in your research with the HIV stuff too.
Yeah, definitely. I know when I was in Kentucky, I learned about older adults doing heroin and other drugs. And then more recently, learning about some senior living communities where seniors wait until they get their social security check, and then they hire prostitutes and other individuals to come in. So certainly a lot of risky behavior taking place among older adults.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Lauren, Myrta is my student this semester, so I'm so happy that she's going into this certificate program, because she's got a great story as well. So Myrta, I'm glad you're going to be doing this, and maybe I'll see you next semester.
Thank you. Yes, I have a lot of experience.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Luann, thank you so much for your comments, and we recently had through the Aging and Health Certificate Program an LCSW from Bancroft Neurology, who actually am trying to convince to go back for her doctorate, but she does a lot of work with the IDD population that is aging, and maybe I can connect you with her. I think that would be a nice conversation for two clinicians to have together about their work and the boots on the ground. And to your point also about substance, I work with so many students in the nursing home as a former nursing home social worker myself. And another interesting situation that's happening is that nursing homes are becoming substance use abuse centers, treatment centers. And it's for older people, for middle-aged people. And so it's an interesting intersection to observe. But I think, I'm struck by what Dr. Kosloff was mentioning in terms of understanding that the biopsychosocial type of interventions are really important in assessing, the person and the environment. But we need to use our clinical skills as social workers to dive deeper into these populations and to really apply those interventions like CBT, like DBT, like all of these wonderful things that we learn about. And like, I don't know, sometimes I think it's just a matter of time and funding again. So it's just like a huge circle that I'm sure everyone's nodding, and we could all talk about this for hours. But it's just been such a pleasure. And thank you, Luann, for bringing these points up. And I also noted that Miles mentioned they were interested in aging with behavioral disabilities as well. Yeah, I don't know if any of the other presenters wanted to add on to that.
So not necessarily that point, but I was just sitting here thinking about the substance abuse thing. And I think another issue is polypharmacy among older adults. So all the medications,
Yes.
and then, if they do have a drink or two, they might be more affected by it. So that's just something also to keep in mind as well.
Yes, and sort of like even more simpler, Dr. Davis, in terms of encouraging adults and older adults to question the medications that they're being prescribed. I see clients privately now, and I met with one just yesterday. This person's taking an anti-anxiety medication, and I asked, "Oh, so how has that been feeling?" And she really didn't know. So, this is not meant to be any sort of discussion that is, doing anything to say negative things about any of the wonderful professions that align and work for older adults, but more so just providing opportunities to question and to be curious and to advocate for oneself. And that has to do with us too as professionals and as researchers, and just keep digging, keep going. Yes. Oh, South Orange. Yes. Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Pastine Stevens. So I wonder if anyone has any other comments or questions or anything. I want to be mindful of our time. We're a few minutes over. So just want to make sure that I'm sure we could all just hang out for a really long time, and we should definitely do that. But definitely want to be mindful of everybody's time and just give opportunity to see if anyone has any further questions for our presenters this evening.
I just wanted to say thank you to you, Dr. Lauren, for putting this together and for having all of the presenters. I felt like everything spoke to me, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Myrta. And I'm not a one-woman show. Dr. Kosloff and Dr. Davis are also on our our careers in aging committee. So thanks to them for being speakers, but also helping with all of the planning and all of the execution of this week's events. And with that, I think that I just would love to thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our presenters. Thanks to everyone joining us in the space and everyone who will view the recording later. This is obviously a passion for all of us in one way or another. And I'm just so pleased with everything this week and all of the comments and all of the work that everyone's doing. I'm so impressed. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone again. This has been wonderful. And hopefully everyone is leaving this session and the week feeling very inspired. Okay,
Thanks,
everybody.
See you soon.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.